Mexico has been characterized for have very violent moments that will be recorded in the history of Mexico. There are many moments, but today I'm gonna talk to you about the 68, October 2 of 1968. On a day like today, but in 1968, there was a massacre in Mexico City. Everyone say that there was 200 deaths. I'm going to tell you how in reality there were more than 600 of deaths. And the events scaled quickly because the Olympic Games were going in the same city. And on July 22, there were a fight between the high schools of 1 and 3 and the UNAM. Grenadiers arrived and with their iconic way to resolving problems with violence, they didn't mind hitting young people because the president gave them permissions. The entire 6 years term President Díaz Ordaz was violent. The right to strike was practically annulled, so every march, every protest, every strike, the SERP used the force. And also, the president froze salaries for females, nurses, and workers. The day after the fight, the Grenadiers still was into the schools that was illegal, and today continue was illegal. Now the students feel intimidated and fear, and in reality the Grenadiers had no right to be inside the schools, so the students spoke and were silent. On July 26, they make a march to get the Grenadiers removed from their schools. The demonstration was in the Citadel Square and went to the Zócalo. People began to walk towards the Zócalo, and as they were by the Latin America Tower, they found a demonstration of support for the Cuban Revolution, so they greet each other, thank each other, and give their support to each other. Each one takes a side on the street, and each one continues on his or her own path. At the corner of Madero and Palma, they are attacked by grenadiers and forced to retreat. The students run towards other strikes that they're happening at that time to get support. Yes, there are a lot. On the streets of Palma and Cinco de Mayo, students meet the grenadiers and the police. Deputy Police Chief Raúl Mendiola yells at the students to leave and receive screams in response. So a reasonable way to resolving this problem was give one order to the police and the military, and was hit every person that were there. They attacked the protesters, chasing them and brutally beating them without distinction between protesters and simple passers-by. The police repression left 500 injured and more than 60 arrested. On July 13, to still fear, high schools 1 and 3 are occupied by police and the army. To instill more fear, a soldier opened a door with a bazooka. In the month of August, there were many marches and strikes seeking to punish the police acts and violence within the schools by the grenadiers. On August 4, the students prepare a petition list. The points are the next. The points are freedom for political prisoners. 2. The articles 145 and 145bis of the Penal Code. Let's talk about the aggression suffered by the police. 3. Disappearance of Grenadier Corps. 4. Dismission of police chiefs. 5. Compensation to the families and of the deaths and injured since the beginning of the conflict. That was in July 22. A march headed to the Zócalo. It was the first time that President Díaz Ordaz was insulted in public. Almost 30,000 people attend. The march ended in the Zócalo and 2,000 people sleep in the Zócalo Square. The next day, on the morning of August 28, several tanks and police trucks began to destroy camps and beds of the members of the march. The students were beaten and chased to the Latin American Tower. Right there, later, several shooters opened fire to the students and police. 2 suspects are arrested, but they immediately are released, and it is known that the 2 shooters work for the highest level of the government. On September 9, 1968, a rally called the Torch Manifestation took place. On September 13, a march called the March of Silence. On September 15, Eberto Castillo gave the scream for independence on the UNAM Esplanade. This infuriated the President Ego. 3 days later, on September 18, the army invaded UNAM. The UNAM was a city. Days later, High School 5 was shot at by machine guns and by police commandos dressed as civilians, causing deaths and injuries. These days there were very violent clashes between grenadiers and students, very violent. Students burned trucks or stole cars to block the streets. They had Molotov cocktails, sticks and stones. And the police no longer cared about shooting. They had gas, weapons, helmets, and order from the president. On October 1, the military left the UNAM installations, finally, surprisingly, but why? Because they already have new orders. On October 2, nearly 200,000 people, including workers, students, and families, gathered in the Plaza of the Three Cultures in a peaceful strike. Meanwhile, the army kept watch. As in all previous demonstrations, this time they have 2 helicopters, one for the police and one for the army. Also members of the Olympia Battalion, which was a pseudo-military group created by the Mexican government to spy, kill, harass, and silence people. The members of the Olympia Battalion were dressed as civilians, but with a white glove on their left hand. Infiltrate. They went on a strike and reached the 3rd floor of the building where the speakers were. Around 5:55 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 flares are fired from the Tlatelolco Tower, giving the first call. At 6:10 o'clock was the second call. A helicopter began to fly over Tlatelolco and fire a green flare. Third call, a red flare. The sniper began to shoot at the families and the soldiers so that the police and soldiers would shoot at the students, families, children, and pregnant women. Many people who managed to flee the square hid in some apartments in nearby buildings. But this did not stop the army and the president's hitmen. They entered the apartments to take out the students and kill them. Hours later, the square of Tlatelolco was full of corpses. The bodies were taken away in garbage trucks, and the wounded were beaten to the doors of the elevators of a building. They were stripped naked and beaten for the militaries. Afterwards, they took them to the church of Tlatelolco, where they gathered 3,000 detainees. And a month later, the blood stains could still be seen on the walls of the church. People went into the buildings to take shelter, but the president's hitmen dressed as civilians and electricians to kill the students who were taking shelter. The detainees were taken to prisons and military camps to be punished. Many students were taken to the Lecumberri prison, where the prisoners both are students and could do whatever they want with them. There they raped and killed many students. The exact number of the massacre of Tlatelolco was still unknown, but the Mexican government and the President Díaz Ordaz himself gave the figure of 20 deaths, only 20 deaths. 13 years later, the writer and the master Elena Poniatowska, in her book The Night of Tlatelolco, what in Spanish is La Noche de Tlatelolco, the master Elena Poniatowska published the interview of a mother who searched among the corpses for her son and revealed that she counted at least 65 in a place very, very small. In general, estimates put number of deaths in a range of 300 to 500. There are witnesses and evidence that affirm that there were crans and garbage trucks collecting hundreds of corpses to later be incinerated. The next morning, another son of a bitch, like Díaz Ordaz. This son of a bitch was the war of the government and very president throughout his life. This bastard sucked everyone's balls and then thanked them. This son of a bitch the next morning said on his news, "It's October 2 and everything is sunny." He never gave something when it came to the pre. On Saturday, October 12, Díaz Ordaz performs at the UNAM Olympic Stadium to inaugurate the 19 Olympic Games, baptized as the Olympiad Pace. Something important to make known what happened were foreign journalists. Many reporters were already in Mexico, and that made the government monitor and persecute inside and outside the country in case they spread anything about the massacre. According to my accounts, seeing records, watching movies, watching documentals, seeing interviews, I say that there were more than 700 people, almost 800 people. I say that, but the President Díaz Ordaz has something to say.
Menciona centenares de muertos. Desgraciadamente hubo algunos, no centenares. Tengo entendido que pasaron de 30 y no llegaron a 40 entre soldados, alborotadores y curiosos. Se dirá que es muy fácil ocultar y disminuir, pero con plazo a cualquiera que tenga el valor de sus propias opiniones y sostenga que fueron centenares, a que rinda alguna prueba, aunque no sea directa y concluyente. Nos podría bastar con lo siguiente: que nos haga la lista con los nombres. Podrán decir, como se ha dicho en otras ocasiones, que se hicieron desaparecer los cadáveres, se sepultaron clandestinamente, se incineraron. Eso es fácil. No es fácil hacerlo impunemente, pero es fácil hacerlo.
They are also still defending what their former bosses did.
Cada 2 de octubre dicen, hoy se conmemora la matanza, la masacre de estudiantes por parte del ejército. No fue una matanza, fue un fuego cruzado, murieron menos de 30 y todo lo demás que se dice es mentira. Mentira como la de que el ejército fue a matar.
It was a fucking massacre and it was the fucking president. Díaz Ordaz died of cancer 9 years later of his government. The next president was his friend, so he copied many things from the Díaz Ordaz presidency. In 1971, another clash between civilians and soldiers took place, leaving 30 dead and more than 200 injuries. This was called the Halconazo because that's what those government hitmen were called. And you can see it in movies like Güeros or Roma. If you want to know more about the Tlatelolco Massacre, you can watch movies like Red Dawn, what in Spanish is Rojo Amanecer. Read books like Díaz Ordaz y el 68, The Night of Tlatelolco by Elena Poniatowska, which is a book full of people who survived the massacre. The quote at the beginning of the video is from this book and from the writer Elena Poniatowska. After so many years, the same wars continue to be repeated. October 2 is not forgotten, neither forgetfulness nor forgetfulness.
Para que nunca se olviden las gloriosas Olimpiadas, mando matar el gobierno 400 camaradas, 400 esperanzas a traición arrebatadas. A pesar de estar tan lejos, se escuchó aquí la descarga de esos valientes soldados que asesinan por la espalda.